There are magics that are older than we are, deeper than we remember. We think we know Christmas, that we have pinned it down in red and green, wrapped it in familiar paper, and tied it with a bow of manufactured sentimentality. We have sanitized it, made it safe for consumption. But the season is not just about the light. It was born in darkness on the year's longest night, from a primal fear of the cold and the quiet. A fear of what waits just outside the flickering circle of the firelight, a deep, gnawing dread that the sun, having weakened for months, might finally surrender and not return. And in that profound darkness, our ancestors told stories to keep the fear at bay. Not of saints or saviors, but of the restless dead, of things that stir when the world is frozen. We have forgotten this. We have traded the authentic terror for tinsel, the shiver of the supernatural for the comfort of the commercial. But the ghosts remain. They are in the faint, melancholic sound of a phantom organ playing in a snowbound manor. They are in the grotesque tale of a bitter sexton, who on Christmas Eve finds himself the captive of goblins in a frozen graveyard. We all know Ebenezer Scrooge, but his story is just one chapter in a vast, haunted library. The ghost story isn't just a forgotten Christmas tradition, but the one that reveals the season's true, shadowed heart. It is time to remember the other spirits of Christmas. It is time to listen to the ghosts. Before the carols, before the cards, there was the cold. For the people of the ancient North, winter was not a season. It was a siege. The sun was a dying god, its arc across the sky a fleeting pale imitation of its summer glory. The nights grew impossibly long, stretching into a seemingly endless expanse of black, and with the darkness came a primal, gnawing fear. This was the winter solstice, a time when the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead was at its thinnest, worn away by the long night. The normal rules of reality were suspended. It was a time when the spirits of the departed could walk abroad, drawn to the warmth and light of the living like desperate, freezing moths to a flame. To pass these long, terrifying nights, people gathered close and told stories of the dead. It was an act of psychological control, a way of taking the great, formless dread of the darkness and giving it a name, a shape, a narrative that could be contained, understood, and ultimately survived. This ancient link between deep winter and restless spirits never truly went away. It slept, buried under centuries of new rituals, and then it reawakened with astonishing force in the 19th century. Victorian England was a world of profound contradictions, a society driven by scientific progress and the raw power of the Industrial Revolution, yet simultaneously gripped by a profound fascination with the supernatural. This was the age of spiritualism, where seances became fashionable, even sophisticated. Parlor events and new technologies like photography were eagerly co-opted in the attempt to capture verifiable images of the dead. This obsession wasn't a rejection of modernity, but a direct reaction to it. In a world being rapidly explained, categorized, and mechanized, a world where Darwin was challenging the very nature of creation and the promise of a divine plan, people craved mystery. They sought tangible proof that there was more to existence than the cold, hard facts of the material world. Into this cultural crucible, the modern Christmas was born. The Victorians, led by the widely publicized example of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, reinvented the holiday as the ultimate festival of the home. The hearth became a sacred altar, a fortress of warmth, family, and carefully cultivated sentimentality against the grime, poverty, and chaos of the industrial city. But this new, extended domestic ritual created a demand. With families gathered for days on end, with the winter wind howling outside like a hungry wolf, they needed entertainment. A revolution in print technology met that demand with explosive force. The new steam-powered press made magazines and books cheap and plentiful. Publishers, sensing a massive commercial opportunity, created the Christmas Annual, a special bumper issue released for the holidays filled with poems, illustrations, and most importantly, stories. These annuals became a commercial sensation, an essential part of the season, and they needed a star attraction. They found it in the ghost story. Reading a chilling tale aloud became a central part of the Christmas celebration. It was a communal act, a shared, delicious shiver of fear that made the fire feel warmer, the room feel safer, and the family bonds feel tighter. The ghost story wasn't an intruder at the Christmas feast. It was the guest of honor, the perfect expression of the season's inherent duality, a celebration of light and life, made all the more precious by a solemn, thrilling acknowledgement of darkness and death. And the stories they told were magnificent. The undisputed master and promoter of this new tradition was Charles Dickens. Through his wildly popular magazines, he commissioned and curated the nation's annual supply of festive terror. And the writers who answered his call were among the finest of the age. A perfect example is a tale penned by Elizabeth Gaskell for Dickens's 1852 Christmas issue of Household Words. It begins, as so many do, around a crackling fire, with a request for a story from the past. The narrator is an old nurse named Hester, and she tells of her time at Furnivall Manor, a great cold house in the wilds of Northumberland, a place haunted by generations of pride and sorrow. She was sent there to care for a little girl, an orphan named Rosamond. The winter set in early and hard that year, the snow falling relentlessly, silently, isolating the manor from the entire world. It was then that the strange events began. A faint, ghostly music from a long-disused organ would drift through the cavernous house on the coldest nights. Little Rosamond began to speak of a companion, a little girl only she could see, who would beckon to her from the garden, weeping silently in the deep snow. Hester, a sensible, practical woman, dismissed it as childish fancy, a product of loneliness. But then she saw it herself. A small, shivering figure by the trees, its face tragically pale, its dress old-fashioned. And always it seemed to be beckoning Rosamond towards the forbidden, disused wing of the house. One evening, the true horror began. Rosamond was missing from her bed. A frantic search, lit by a single candle, led Hester toward the old wing, the spectral organ music swelling louder and more discordant than ever before. She burst into the great hall to a terrifying scene. There, high on a balcony, stood the ghostly figure of the little girl, pulling Rosamond by the hand towards the crumbling edge. Below them, another phantom waited, a terrifying woman with a face contorted by pure hatred. And behind them all, the ghost of the wicked old Lord Furnivall, laughing and urging them on. Hester screamed and snatched Rosamond back, just as the ghostly child tried to pull her over the rail. In that moment, the entire vision vanished. The secret was finally revealed. Years ago, the cruel old lord had cast his own daughter and her child out into the snow on a bitter winter's night, where they froze to death. The haunting was a spectral reenactment of that terrible crime, doomed to repeat itself, with the ghost of the wronged child trying to lure a living child to the same icy fate, not out of malice, but out of a ghostly, eternal, and unbearable loneliness. The man who cemented the bond between Christmas and ghosts was, of course, Charles Dickens himself. His 1843 novella, A Christmas Carol, is so famous that it has almost eclipsed every other festive ghost story. But Scrooge and his spectral guides were not born in a vacuum. They had a prototype, a trial run that Dickens published 7 years earlier in his first novel, The Pickwick Papers. It is a darker, stranger, and more grotesque tale, a story that reveals the raw, unsettling origins of his most famous creation. It is called The Story of the Goblins Who Stole a Sexton. The sexton's name is Gabriel Grubb. He is a bitter, angry man who hates humanity and finds joy only in the solitary work of digging graves and listening to the mournful tolling of the church bell. He is, in every way, the spiritual and literary ancestor of Ebenezer Scrooge. On Christmas Eve, while his neighbors are singing carols and celebrating, Gabriel Grubb is in the churchyard, digging a grave with a malicious grin on his face. He scoffs at the sounds of merriment, taking a swig from his bottle, when he is startled by a strange figure sitting on a tombstone. It is a goblin, with thin, crossed legs and a high sugarloaf hat, its face twisted in a mocking grin. Before Gabriel can react, the goblin leaps, grabs him by the collar, and drags him down, through the cold earth itself. He finds himself in a vast subterranean cavern, filled with thousands of goblins, sitting in circles, drinking steaming liquid from skulls. The king of the goblins accuses Gabriel of wickedness, of hating his fellow man. And like Scrooge, Gabriel is to be taught a lesson. But this is not the gentle, sorrowful education of the ghost of Christmas past. This is a brutal, physical torment. The goblins kick him, beat him, and drag him before a series of magical, moving pictures projected onto the cavern walls. They show him scenes of human kindness and family love, the very things he despises. They show him a poor family, huddled together for warmth, but radiant with happiness. They show him the birth of a child, the overwhelming joy of a mother. With each vision, the goblins' mockery and torment intensified, forcing Gabriel not just to watch, but to truly feel the warmth he had so long rejected. Finally, they show him a vision of his own future, his lonely, unmourned death. He is then kicked and thrown back to the surface, waking up in the churchyard on Christmas morning, cold, bruised, and a changed man. He leaves the town, and when he returns years later, he is humble and kind, his heart finally opened by the terrifying ordeal. The story of the goblins is a Christmas carol in its raw, folkloric form. The goblins are not the moral, ethereal guides of the later story. They are chaotic, violent creatures from the earth, more pagan than Christian. The story is less about spiritual redemption and more about a brutal, supernatural intervention. It shows us Dickens's creative process, how he took this rough, frightening piece of folklore and refined it, softened it, and polished it into the powerful, sentimental classic that would define Christmas for generations. He understood that to truly appreciate the light, you must first be dragged, kicking and screaming through the darkness. But Dickens's role as the architect of the Christmas ghost story extended far beyond his own famous novellas. As editor of the periodical All the Year Round, he published what many consider to be one of the most perfect and chilling tales of psychological horror ever written. Though not explicitly set on December 25th, The Signal Man was the centerpiece of his 1866 Christmas issue, presented to the nation as a festive terror. It is a story that swaps the Gothic manor for the modern industrial world of the railway, proving that ghosts could haunt the machine age just as effectively as they haunted the past. The narrator, a man of logic and reason, is hiking through a desolate countryside when he looks down into a deep railway cutting, a raw wound carved into the landscape. He sees a lone signalman standing by his post, a solitary figure in a lonely, damp and gloomy place. The narrator calls down, "Hello below there!" The signalman, instead of looking up, turns and stares into the black mouth of the railway tunnel, a look of sheer terror on his face. This strange, fearful reaction unnerves the narrator, but he descends the winding path to the signal box. The signalman is a diligent, intelligent man, but he is deeply, profoundly troubled. He confides that a spectre haunts his post, appearing at the mouth of the tunnel. Each time it comes, a figure with one arm hiding its face, the other waving frantically. Disaster follows. The first appearance preceded a horrific train collision, the second, the death of a passenger. Now for a week it has returned again and again, silent, but always waving, always warning. The signalman is tormented. He knows it is a premonition of some new, terrible catastrophe. But he doesn't know what it is or how to stop it. He is a prisoner of his duty, trapped between the rational world of timetables and signals and the irrational horror of the ghost's warning. The narrator tries to rationalize it, to convince the signalman that it's a product of stress, isolation, and the tricks of the wind. He leaves, promising to return the next day with a doctor. But when he returns, the cutting is filled with railway workers. A foreman explains what happened. The signalman is dead. He was struck by a passing train. The engine driver explains the final horrifying moments. As his train came around the bend, he saw the signalman standing on the tracks, looking not at the train, but transfixed by the tunnel. The driver shouted, "Hello, below there, look out." He waved his arm frantically to warn him, but the signalman was paralyzed, staring at the darkness. He was killed instantly. The ghost was not warning of a disaster to come. It was a premonition of the signalman's own death. Its gestures and cries a spectral reenactment, a perfect and terrible prophecy of the very words and actions that would accompany his end. While Dickensian ghosts often sought to redeem the living, other Victorian tales explored a darker, more vengeful kind of haunting, where the spirits returned not to teach, but to punish. In these stories, the cozy Christmas setting becomes a courtroom, and the ghost is both witness and executioner. A chilling example comes from the pen of Algernon Blackwood, a master of weird fiction. His 1908 story, The Kit Bag, is a masterclass in suspense set against the backdrop of the festive season. The story's narrator, a young man named Johnson, is the secretary to a prominent defense lawyer. It is Christmas Eve, and Johnson is preparing to leave for a holiday in the Alps. His employer has just secured a controversial acquittal for a man named John Turk, accused of a particularly gruesome murder. Johnson is unnerved by the case and deeply disturbed by Turk, a man he is convinced is guilty. As he packs his kit bag in the lawyer's empty, echoing office, he is overwhelmed by a sense of dread. The rooms feel impressed with the memory of a profound and terrible emotion, as if the very walls have absorbed the horror of the trial. He hurries home to his own lodgings, but the feeling of being watched, of an unseen malevolence, follows him. He tries to dismiss it, blaming his overtired nerves. But then he notices something impossible. The kit bag, which he had packed and locked at the office, is now in his apartment, standing in the corner of the room. He assumes he must have brought it back in a moment of absent-mindedness, a simple mistake. He tries to rationalize it, but the fear grows, cold and sharp. He hears faint, dragging footsteps outside his door. The handle turns slowly. He is paralyzed by terror. The door creaks open, and though he sees nothing, he feels a presence enter the room, a thing of monstrous and intelligent wickedness. In a blind panic, he decides to flee, to leave the bag and escape into the night. He grabs his coat and rushes for the door, but his eyes fall upon the kit bag one last time. Its shape seems to have changed. It is bulging, sagging, as if containing a heavy, oddly shaped object. And seeping from the bottom, staining the carpet a deep, horrifying red, is a dark, wet patch. The ghost of the murderer, or perhaps his victim, has delivered a final, grisly piece of evidence. Justice, denied in a human court, has found another way to announce itself on Christmas Eve. Blackwood's tale transforms the festive holiday into a time of moral reckoning, where the ghosts of our shared sins refuse to stay buried. Sometimes, however, the consequences were not for a single bloody act, but for a lifetime of choices that slowly erode the soul. The Irish writer Sheridan Le Fanu, a master of psychological terror, explored this in his 1872 story, Green Tea. It concerns the Reverend Jennings, a respectable clergyman tormented by a spectre that seems to be a projection of his own anxieties. His haunting is not the result of a singular crime, but of his lifestyle. He works late into the night, delving into esoteric pagan theology that sits uneasily with his Christian faith, and he fuels these obsessive studies with copious amounts of strong green tea. This seemingly harmless habit, this seemingly innocent intellectual curiosity, is his undoing. He begins to see a small black monkey with glowing red eyes. At first, it is a fleeting glimpse on an omnibus, but soon it is his constant companion, invisible to everyone else, an intimate and personal demon. The creature is utterly malevolent. It doesn't just haunt him, it actively dismantles his life and his sanity. It perches on his Bible during sermons, whispering blasphemies in his ear just as he tries to speak of sacred things. It follows him, mocks him, and relentlessly, methodically, tries to convince him to end his own life. Jennings seeks help from Dr. Hesselius, a metaphysical doctor who theorizes that the constant chemical stimulation from the green tea, combined with Jennings's intellectual overreach, has opened an interior eye in his soul. This is not a ghost in the traditional sense, but a being from a parallel spiritual world that was always there, waiting for a crack in reality to slip through. The haunting is a direct consequence of his own habits. The story ends in tragedy, with Jennings succumbing to the creature's influence. It's a terrifying exploration of how our own actions, our ambitions, and even our thirst for knowledge can thin the veil and invite something dreadful to cross over, turning our own minds into a haunted house from which there is no escape. Not all ghosts of consequence were so malevolent. Some of the most effective tales drew their power from a sense of profound, inconsolable sorrow. The Scottish writer Margaret Oliphant, a contemporary of Dickens, was a master of this form. Her 1882 story, The Open Door, is a haunting exploration of grief, faith, and the sounds that can break a family apart. The story is told by Colonel Mortimer, a man who has retired with his family to a pleasant house in the country. Life is idyllic until one cold winter night his young son Roland is found shivering and terrified at the bottom of the garden, near a ruined wall. The boy claims to have heard a voice, a terrible pleading cry of, "Oh, mother, let me in." This is the beginning of the haunting. The sound is not constant, but it returns, always at night, always from the same spot by the ruins. It is a sound of pure, unbearable anguish, a disembodied voice that seems to hang in the cold winter air, a grief made audible. The family is thrown into turmoil. The servants, local people who know the old stories, are terrified and threaten to leave. Roland falls gravely ill with a brain fever, tormented by the sound he cannot shut out. Colonel Mortimer, a man of action and reason, a man used to command, is driven to distraction by his own powerlessness. He tries everything. He patrols the grounds with his butler, a former soldier. They find nothing. He brings in the local doctor, a man of science, who dismisses it as a trick of the wind, a rattle of the branches in the east wind. But the sound persists, an undeniable, supernatural sorrow that defies all rational explanation. Desperate, the colonel turns to the local parish priest, a man of faith. The priest, a gentle and understanding soul, agrees to help. On a bitter moonlit night, he goes with the colonel to the ruins. They wait in the freezing cold, and then they hear it, the terrible pleading cry. The priest does not flee. He steps forward and performs an impromptu exorcism. He speaks to the unseen presence, not with anger or command, but with compassion. He tells the lost soul that its mother is long gone, that its earthly attachments are over, and that it must go on towards God's light. He prays for its peace, and as he speaks, the sound fades, not abruptly, but slowly, gently, as if the spirit has finally been heard, and its long, lonely vigil is over. The sound is never heard again. Roland recovers. The haunting of the open door is not one of terror, but of tragedy. The ghost is not a monster, but a lost child, its grief so powerful it has stained the very air of the place. The story suggests that some hauntings can only be answered with empathy, and that the greatest act of courage is not to fight the darkness, but to listen to its sorrow. As the Victorian age waned and the 20th century began, a new master of the form emerged, one who would strip the ghost story of its moral certainty and sentimentality, leaving only a residue of pure intellectual dread. His name was Montague Rhodes James, and his ghosts were not interested in saving your soul. They were simply there to take it. M.R. James was a medieval scholar and provost at Cambridge, and for him the ghost story was a cherished Christmas ritual. Every Christmas Eve, he would invite colleagues and students to his rooms, and, by candlelight, read them a new story he had written for the occasion. These tales would change the genre forever. James believed a ghost story should be set in the everyday world, and its horror should creep in at the edges, a slow poison. His ghosts were not ethereal phantoms. They were disturbingly physical things of bone and hair and damp, crumpled linen. They were often ancient, malevolent entities, pagan spirits unearthed by the careless meddling of some well-meaning but foolish academic. Perhaps no story better captures the Jamesian method than "Oh, whistle, and I'll come to you, my lad." Its protagonist is Parkins, a young, arrogant professor of ontography, a man of logic who prides himself on his disbelief in the supernatural. While on holiday at a sleepy seaside town, he unearths a small bronze whistle from a Templar ruin. It has a strange Latin inscription: "Quis est iste qui venit?" Who is this who is coming? That evening, back in his lonely hotel room, driven by academic curiosity, Parkins blows the whistle. The note it produces is not musical, but a thin, shrill shriek that seems to violate the silence. Nothing happens immediately. But that night, he dreams of a vast, empty beach under a sickly moon, and a frantic running figure being pursued by something low and white. The next day, he feels an unreasoning panic on the beach as he sees a white, fluttering thing far down the sand. The true horror comes that night. The wind howls against the hotel windows. Parkins is in bed when the second empty bed in his room begins to stir. The sheets move. A figure begins to rise. James does not describe it clearly. He only gives us Parkins's terrified impression of a face of crumpled linen, with intensely black and intensely malign eyes. The thing shambles towards him. Parkins screams and faints. The next morning the whistle is gone, and his smug rationalism is shattered forever. The thing is never explained. This was James's genius. He took the Christmas ghost story out of the realm of morality plays and plunged it into the cold, dark depths of cosmic horror. Another of James's classic Christmas Eve readings, the mezzotint, perfects this art of creeping dread through a haunted object. Mr. Williams, a curator at a university museum, purchases an old, unremarkable print of a country manor. It's a drab, lifeless scene under a pale moon, but when he shows it to a colleague, they notice something odd. A figure, small and indistinct, seems to be crawling on all fours on the lawn. Williams dismisses it as a flaw in the print, but later when he looks again, the figure has moved. It is closer to the house. Over the course of a few hours, every time someone looks at the print, the scene has changed. The figure has crawled to a window. The window is now open. A light appears in an upper room. Finally, in the last horrifying iteration of the scene, the crawling figure is gone from the lawn. But a different, terrible shape is seen at the upper window, carrying a small, shrouded bundle away from the house. Through research, Williams uncovers the history of the house depicted in the print. A poacher, accused of stealing the Lord's infant son, was executed on the spot, proclaiming his innocence to the end. The child was never found. The mezzotint is not a static image, but a haunted replay of a terrible crime. A ghostly time-lapse photograph of a kidnapping and murder, its horror revealed not in a sudden shock, but in a slow, inexorable, and utterly chilling progression that the viewer is powerless to stop. This theme of intellectual folly leading to a terrifying supernatural confrontation is perfected in another of James's masterpieces, A Warning to the Curious. The story is set in the desolate, wind-scoured coastal town of Seaburgh, a place of crumbling cliffs and lonely beaches. Here, an unemployed young man named Paxton, an amateur archaeologist desperate for a discovery that will make his name, seeks out the legendary last of the 3 holy crowns of East Anglia, said to guard the English coast from invasion. He successfully deciphers the local legends and locates the ancient crown, unearthing it from its centuries-long hiding place. But in doing so, he has broken a sacred trust, violating a pact far older than himself. The crown has a guardian, a spectral protector whose duty is eternal. Paxton is immediately plagued by a gnawing sense of being watched, which soon escalates into the certainty of being followed. He sees a figure in the distance, unnaturally swift and thin, a thing of frantic, spider-like speed, keeping pace with him along the empty beaches and desolate fields. The terror escalates as he realizes this is no human pursuer. It is the ghost of William Ager, the man who buried the crown and whose family was sworn to protect it for all time. The story culminates in a relentless, breathless chase across the bleak landscape, as Paxton, now joined by a concerned narrator, tries desperately to rebury the crown and appease the spirit. But it's too late. The guardian is not a creature to be reasoned with. It is an implacable force of nature. Paxton is found dead on the beach, his body broken, his mouth full of sand and stones, and a look of ultimate terror frozen on his face, a victim of his own curiosity. The story is a quintessential Jamesian nightmare, a chilling warning that some things are best left buried, and that the guardians of the past are patient, tireless, and utterly, terrifyingly unforgiving. While M.R. James was perfecting his brand of scholarly terror, other writers were exploring a different kind of Christmas horror, one rooted not in ancient curses, but in the anxieties of the modern world. The early 20th century was a time of burgeoning cities, of electric lights, and of the crushing anonymity of the crowd. It was a world where you could be surrounded by millions of people and still be utterly terrifyingly alone. And it was this modern dread that gave birth to a new kind of Christmas ghost story. Consider the work of E.F. Benson, a contemporary of James. In his story, The Face, we meet a woman named Hester, who is blessed with a comfortable life, a loving husband, and a deep sense of happiness. But she is haunted by a recurring dream. In the dream, she is always in a crowded place, a train station, a theater, and in the crowd, she sees a face. It is a face that is puffy and pale and yellowish, with sodden, wrinkled skin and eyes of a faded blue. The face is not threatening. It simply looks at her with an expression of unutterable loneliness, of a soul that is lost and wandering. The dream begins to bleed into her waking life. She starts seeing the face in real crowds, a fleeting glimpse on a busy street that chills her to the bone. Her husband dismisses it as a hallucination, a symptom of stress, but Hester knows it is real. The sightings become more frequent, more insistent. One year, she and her husband decide to spend Christmas in their country house. She feels a sense of profound relief. Here, in the quiet countryside, surely the face cannot find her. On Christmas Eve, the snow begins to fall, blanketing the world in a silent, pure white. Hester feels a deep sense of peace. She stands by the window, watching the soft, feathery flakes drift down. The world outside is a perfect, empty canvas, and then she sees it. Out of the swirling snow, the face begins to form. It is not in a crowd this time. It is alone, just beyond the glass, looking in. The puffy, yellowed features, the faded blue eyes, the look of ultimate soul-crushing loneliness. It is there for her. There is no escape. The story ends on that image of pure, inescapable dread. Benson's story is a masterpiece of psychological horror. The ghost is not an external threat. It is a manifestation of an internal fear, the fear of loneliness, of being lost, of the sorrow that lurks just beneath the surface of even the happiest life. This theme of the uninvited spectral guest found its perfect expression in a tale by A.M. Burridge. It is Christmas Eve. A party is gathered in a grand country house. After dinner, someone suggests a game of hide and seek in the dark. The host is hesitant. He tells them of a tragedy that happened in this very house years ago. A young man named Jackson was killed during a Christmas Eve game when another player accidentally slammed a heavy door on him. The guests are intrigued rather than deterred. They decide to play, but they give the game a new, chilling name: Smee. The rules are simple. One person, the seeker, stays behind while the others hide. The hiders do not call out. The seeker must go through the dark house, whispering "Smee" into each room. If they find another player, that person remains silent and joins the search. The last person to be found is the winner. There are 12 people playing. The lights are extinguished. The house is plunged into a vast, echoing darkness. One guest, Jack, hides in a small, dusty room under the stairs. Time stretches on. He hears the whisper of Smee, far off in the house. Then, he feels a presence in the room with him. A hand brushes his. He assumes it's another player, and in accordance with the rules, he gets up and joins them in the search. They move together in the darkness, two silent figures, but the hand he holds is unnaturally, dreadfully cold. He continues the game, whispering "Smee" into the darkness, his silent, cold companion beside him. One by one, they find the others, until only one player is left. Everyone gathers in the main hall, laughing, and they turn on the lights, and then they count. There are 12 people in the hall. All 12 people who started the game are standing there. So who or what was the 13th player? Who was the silent figure with the deathly cold hand? The tradition of the Christmas ghost story, so vital to the 19th and early 20th centuries, faded with the arrival of new horrors and new media. The unimaginable, real-world horror of the world wars, the visceral thrills of the cinema, and the flickering blue light of television all offered more immediate forms of fear. The quiet literary ghost story, which required imagination and patience, was pushed to the cultural margins. But it never vanished. In the 1970s, the BBC series A Ghost Story for Christmas revived the tradition for a new generation, adapting the tales of M.R. James and others with chilling effectiveness and creating a new holiday ritual for millions of viewers. Today, the tradition continues to flicker, often in defiance of the mainstream. It has returned to its roots as a more personal, almost cult-like ritual for those who feel the modern Christmas, with its relentless commercialized cheer, is missing something vital. It is crucial to understand that the Christmas ghost story is not in competition with the Halloween ghost story. They are entirely different creatures, born of different seasons and different anxieties. Halloween is a festival of the grotesque, of open performative horror. Its traditions are about going out into the night, confronting the monster. The Christmas ghost story is its inversion. It is a tradition of coming inside, of shutting the door against the dark, only to find the horror is already in the room with you. Halloween's ghosts are an external threat, Christmas ghosts, as we have seen, are often a reflection of an internal state, of guilt, of memory, of sorrow, of loneliness. One is a scream, the other is a whisper in a quiet room. That whisper reminds us that even in our safest, most sacred spaces, the past is never truly gone. It sits with us by the fire, a silent, unseen guest, a necessary counterpoint to the relentless light of the festive season, a quiet reminder of the darkness that gives the light its meaning. We began in the dark with the old magic of winter. We journeyed into the gas-lit parlours of the Victorians, stood in the shadow of the scholar's candle, and watched a ghostly face form in the Christmas snow. We have seen that the Christmas ghost story is not a strange historical accident. It is the holiday's secret heart, the echo of its birth in the fear of the dark. We think of Christmas as a time of joy, of birth, of new beginnings. But the ghost story reminds us that it is also a time of endings. It takes place at the death of the year, in the face of a darkness that feels absolute. And this is the final, surprising truth of the tradition. The Christmas ghost story is not about the fear of death. It is about the desperate, frantic, and beautiful affirmation of life. We tell tales of the dead to feel more alive. We scare ourselves together in a room full of light, to remind ourselves how good it is to be safe, to be warm, to be together. The ghost is the darkness that proves the value of the light. It is the cold that makes us grateful for the fire. The story is a ritual, a spell cast against the dying of the year, the chilling whisper that makes our celebration not just merry, but meaningful.